listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast with the Circle of Hope pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Jonny Rashid.
I'm Rachel Sensenig.
I'm Julie Hoke.
I'm Ben White.
And it's good to be together again on this Holy Week. It's one of the holiest weeks that we have. We're walking towards the cross, and I'm glad to invite all of our listeners into that experience, even on this podcast.
Yeah, Holy Week edition of Resist and Restore podcast. We're coming to you from our individual homes because we're all quarantined as we could be.
So let's get to it. Let's start with talkback. What are we talking back to this week?
Wait, before we get all the way into it, what in this digital virtual encounter that we're having, what is your preferred method of connecting with people? What's your favorite video conferencing thing? What are y'all using?
I've discovered that FaceTime is pretty fun.
All right, FaceTime. Has anyone done Google Duo?
No Google Duo.
No one likes Google Duo, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's got filters. You can have like a puppy hat.
Is that what the green that's what the green textures use instead of FaceTime?
Yeah, the green texture is like the Google. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
That's what that is. That's the green text version of it. So
Jonny?
That's like the off-brand cereal version of FaceTime.
Ben, our friend Marguerite sent me a video of a priest in Italy who was recording mass for people, and he accidentally was in, had the filters going on. Like hats and stuff.
Total boomer
so
move.
Funny.
Julie, what do you use?
Don't shade on the boomers. We love the boomers.
I know. I shade because I love. Julie, what do you use?
Well, it took a quarantine for me to get on to Marco Polo, but I'm enjoying that. My kids are enjoying that. They love the voice filters on that.
Well, Circle of Hope has landed on Google Hangouts Meet, which is a very unfortunately branded thing because there is Google Hangouts on which you can do video conferencing, but there's also Google Hangouts Meet, which is a slightly better product that you get, I think, only if you have a business suite. Is that right, Jonny?
It's like the business class. It's the non-coach version of Google Hangouts. When you're rich, you get nice things. That's how America works.
And apparently Circle of Hope is rich because we pay for, we use Google for our circleofhope.net domain and our email system. So we get this product and we're using it actually on Sundays at our online meeting. Please join us at circleofhope.net/online meeting this Sunday for Easter. We'd love to have you. And afterwards, there's going to be opportunity for talkback. And that's like elemental to Circle of Hope because we know that dialogue keeps us connected and maintains our gravity. We want people to be able to get into a dialogue of love, and we think that's where they're going to be transformed. So we actually make that happen at our Sunday meetings all the time. It's not just a talking head talking at you.
Yes.
You're not just getting your brain filled with information from the Bible or other places. You're actually participating and relating even in the meeting around ideas sometimes, but also around your heart. There's room to share.
We're doing it even in quarantine.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't know how to do a Sunday meeting without talkback, right?
And you know what? I don't think any of our listeners know how to do a Sunday meeting without talkback too, except instead of telling your spouse or your neighbor what kind of stuff you actually want to say, you can tell the whole church. You can just type it in the chat in this case or just talk back, That parking lot conversation you have about how terrible the pastor's sermon was, we just have that right in the moment. It's really good.
Or they offer like profound insight. So that's what we're...
Yeah, that's more common. I think we get less. I always say when I'm introducing talkback, there's room for questions. There's room for your own story, your own insight, because we think that God is speaking to you. Our whole idea for a message is that we're getting our hearts and minds moving in the same direction so that God can speak to us. And God's going to speak to you. And we're practicing listening to God while we're listening to someone talk. That's why we have a message at the Sunday meeting.
So if you want to get in on this, email Luke, Luke, at circleofhope.net. You could email me, Jonny, at circleofhope.net, or Jimmy, Jimmy. I just gave you 3 email addresses for some reason, but you can email all of them. and let us know you want to get into one of the talkback groups, and then we'll put you in after the Sunday meeting. And you can also find me on any social media platform because my very online self hasn't changed in quarantine. So you can find me anywhere. I'll use whatever. I'll adapt to whatever you want.
No, don't send him a carrier pigeon, though, okay? That won't work.
I might cook it is the issue.
It's so true. All right, let's talk about what we were talking about in Talkback this week.
So on Google Hangouts Meet this week, we had a bunch of breakout groups after the meeting, people that responded to the request that Jonny just made that you join us. They responded, and I think there were about 50 people in different groups talking and responding to what the pastors had brought. And Julie, what was your group talking about? You said it was something really cool.
Well, we were talking about Holy Week, and inevitably people were just getting honest about their losses, their grief over not having the opportunity to be together this week. It's our tradition in Circle of Hope to actually gather together face to face every night as we walk with Jesus in the week leading to his death. And people have had profound experiences over the years, myself included. So we were being honest about the loss of that this year and how hard it is to be alone in our homes, making this journey. Even with all the ways we're trying to do it together, it's still really different. And someone shared a story about their growing up experience. Their mom dressed them in white on Easter morning and how they were looking forward to that because that's just the physical representation of something is new and coming to life, and lamenting not having the space to do that when we gather. And someone else in the group said, you should just wear white anyway. Do it anyway.
Yes.
And
nice.
then I know, right? And then the spirit of the whole conversation shifted, and we started just naming things almost in defiance of this quarantine and of this disease and all that is wrong in the world. We are naming how God is making things right and what we wanted to do it anyway in spite of our situation.
Not like go and have an Easter service anyway, right?
No. Just like find a way to do it where we are right now, because the resurrection life is as true now as it is any other time, and maybe even feels more so in the midst of our distress.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. When death is so apparent to so many people, when we're having this common experience of facing death very seriously, not ignoring it. It's impossible to ignore. It's everywhere. Resurrection, gets bigger and more important.
Yep.
Anything else you guys want to that you're defying? Did you hear that in your groups too? Were people trying to make something out of this moment?
The people in our group were pretty determined to pray this week in spite of the tension that they feel. Tension was a big word in our group because I think it's hard to know what to do in our isolation. Sometimes there's this tendency to kind of just shut down and be inside of ourselves, and they were going to push themselves instead to relate to God and to keep relating to each other. And I think, man, that's the invitation of Holy Week to, Jesus is holding a lot of tension this week as he walks to the cross, and it takes some determination on our part to walk with him. So they were looking to that and even feeling the need to be with Jesus and to pray for all the reasons that you guys are saying.
I really do appreciate the defiance in the face of the crisis, because I do think that's what we need. And that's part of the resistance that we have, Resisting despair is part of the Christian way. It's part of the Circle of Hope way. In my group, people were very conscious of their despair, though. And one of the benefits of being in a community where we are open to resisting evil is that we can actually approach evil, despair, and negative feelings without fear. And our people were talking about it. This is not an easy time for people, and that they actually need the salvation of the cross and of Easter. There's something even more meaningful about what Holy Week is during this time because we actually need to be saved from something. And, I'm wondering what that is. And especially because we'll still be in a physical quarantine after Easter, we'll have an opportunity then to say, well, what is the material consequence of the cross for me? In other words, how does Jesus actually affect my life? I think those are the questions that we have an opportunity to answer now because we actually are in quite a crisis.
Yeah, Jonny, that's so right. I want to end with this quote from Paul in Romans 5 that hopefully can give you that kind of defiant hope in the face of your despair, that we can acknowledge the despair and also keep on hoping in that kind of wear the white dress anyway kind of way that Julie was sharing. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. Now. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us.
We're so grateful that you're listening to our podcast. And before we keep going, I just want to tell you some things that are happening in our community that I want you to be a part of. This week is Holy Week. You'll probably hear this as coming out on Monday, Thursday. And Holy Week is a time to prepare for Jesus' death. And how we've been doing it is through circleofhope.net/daily prayer. We're praying 3 times a day, a breath prayer that the writer is offering us at 9 and noon and 3. And then in the evening, we have an half an hour of prayer that ends the evening, and that will hopefully bring you some comfort and some peace as you go into your sleep. So that's Holy Week. On Easter morning at 6:15, we'll awake to do a prayer of joy as we celebrate the resurrection. This will be broadcast online as well, and you can find all of these links at circleofhope.net/online meeting. And then at 5 o'clock in the evening, we'll have another worship time for Easter. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to enter in this week, and I hope that you can take advantage of some of them. If you want to help us by sharing this podcast around, that would be great. Post it to your feeds, retweet it, and so on. You can also subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you want to help it go further, share some money with us. You can go to circleofhope.net/sharing to do that. And if you can't afford any money, at least give us a positive review where you listen. That will help more people hear our podcast.
Well, someone asked us a great question this week, so maybe this next section, our middle section, should be called Great Question. Here it is. I'm wondering if you guys can help answer it today. How is God being with me in the midst of suffering and tragedy better than God protecting me from suffering and tragedy? What would you say to this person?
Dang, dude, great question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a classic. I think like most of the Bible's about that.
Yes, let me repeat the question. How is God being with me in the midst of suffering and tragedy better than God protecting me from suffering and tragedy? This is really a great one for Holy Week.
I mean, I love the question. My first response is to be empathetic. I'm not sure it is better, It would be.
What? Wait, it's not better?
No, I God protecting me from suffering and tragedy sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't want to feel pain and tragedy. And in some ways, my hope is in that this will go away, that God will save me from it. And so I do think it is better for God to save me from my suffering and tragedy. Yet here I am in suffering and tragedy.
I think that our questioner, he's asking, and I know it's he, but I'm not going to say who it is. Don't worry. He's asking this question because God doesn't protect me from suffering as often as I would like God to. And this is the situation that I'm in which there is suffering and tragedy in my life. So I want to figure out how this is better because it seems more common,
It is common. And I think we all have our own version of this question. I I'm still sitting with even the phrasing of the question. I appreciate often we're like asking why suffering, why evil, which is probably wrapped up in this questioner's question too. But how is it different or how is it better? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's such a great question, because we don't. It's like I said, most of the Bible's about this. You know, like you read through the Psalms, for example, and the Psalms are dealing with the full experience of humanity. That's why they're so great to read, because people are having real problems. They are suffering. They are experiencing tragedy, and they're trying to relate to God through it. And there are some Psalms that like make a really simple kind of moral calculus about how the universe works and what's going on in my life. Like, if something bad is happening to me, it must be because I'm terrible. And if something good is happening to me, it must be because God loves me in a special way, and maybe I earned it somehow. You know, the simple calculus. But then there are other Psalms that are like, why are the wicked prospering? Why are good things happening to bad people? That, you know, that's all tied up in this. The nature of good and evil is tied up in this question. And Jesus says, you know, God causes the rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. And that is still like a serious mic drop from the Sermon on the Mount. Why? What? Huh? I don't understand. And yet this does seem to be the nature of reality. So our questioner, like you're saying, Julie, it's a good question because they're trying to make sense of what is, not try to have some existential kind of principled kind of otherworldly, like there's some way to figure this out if we just like were objective about it. You know, they're actually living in their real felt life and trying to relate to God in it.
Right. It's a question that comes from our finiteness as human beings. Like we can't grasp the vastness or the complexity of creation and the way things are, but it's just, it's the way things are. So what do I do with that? How do I make sense of it?
Yeah. It is the ultimate human question that kind of motivates all philosophical thinking in some sense.
Yes, it is. And Jesus is the basic human, and he walks through suffering and tragedy to show us that we can. So I think the opportunity is to keep growing up into our fullness. If we never go through any suffering and tragedy, we stay like little babies that just need to be cared for all the time. And we never get to become the caregivers and the life givers for the world that we are designed to be.
Why can't God just make us that way now? Why do I have to suffer to get better? Why can't God just make me good now?
Well, I think because God is not coercive. You know, God, what we want and what we desire is really part of this picture. We have a choice in this matter on some level.
I'm liking what Julie's saying about like, this is the way things are. And then what you're saying, Rachel, about us growing up. It seems like we could have this kind of otherworldly perspective that we don't have. And I think many theologians try to have some perspective that they don't have. They're not living in it. They're trying to figure this out on some philosophical, you know, theological and mental backflips that it takes to make some kind of, quote, sense about this. But if we start with, this is the way things are, and this is how things grow, you know, like, So yeah, like it is that way because we know, we have observed, everyone has observed it by growing up themselves. That struggle is a part of mastery and strengthening. And you know, how do you, like, if someone gets everything handed to them in their childhood and never has to walk, like a second child. I don't know. This might just be a old wives' tale, but the second child walks later than the first child. Because the second child has the first child to deliver things. You know, I don't have to get up and go and do anything, so I won't actually become a walker.
Or the parents neglect the second child.
Maybe.
Oh, poor Jonny. But yeah, what you're saying, Ben, is absolutely true. Like we can't avoid suffering in life. And if we try, we will get twisted and bent up in different ways. Like my friends in AA say, there are no biological shortcuts. We cannot avoid suffering. We have to learn to suffer well.
I like this theological work that we're doing. from a theological perspective, there is there was a disagreement about how you should do theology. Some people say, no, you have to start with God and then go from God, as opposed to starting from your circumstance and then going from God. And that's a valid debate that happened in the 19th century in Europe. But I think it matters even more than that.
Yeah, no, but then they decided that they were going to start with God, and they were actually starting with their white selves, and exported colonialism as Christianity all over the entire world.
Yeah, I agree that it's not a good way to do it.
They were wrong. They weren't starting from God. They were starting from themselves and calling it God and ruining everything forever since.
I agree with you, but I for the people listening, because there are people like this in the world, some people want to receive divine comfort before someone just happens to make sense of their circumstances. Does that make sense?
I mean, I don't think divine comfort is divorced from this. I'm just talking about how we're doing theology. And yeah, I guess the temptation of pretending to start with God and your idea about God as if it were pure and actually 100% God and not something filtered through you. To start there, I guess it makes that comfort more powerful because it seems more instrumental. It seems like God is massaging goodness into your life with God's own giant God fingers.
I do think that it's led to a lot of theological problems, but I know people that need the certainty of God's sovereignty to find any comfort in their suffering.
Unpack that sovereignty real
quick. That
quick.
means God is in charge of everything, including my own suffering. So I rest in the mystery of my suffering because I am sure that God has a higher way than me. Now, my disclaimer is I don't necessarily subscribe to that belief, but I view it with an open hand because of my own tininess, but also because, practically speaking, I've seen it comfort people in the face of the worst of tragedies. Like their children dying, their parents dying, unjust arrests, jail time, all these problems. And they come to me with, here's how God is comforting me. I don't know how I can deconstruct that or if I should even.
I don't think you should because I believe it, but just in a way that is much less concrete than I think many theologians write in books about.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well said, Ben. Julie, do you want to throw anything in here before I wrap us up?
Well, I feel the pressure of having a succinct answer when I don't think there is just one. But I know that in our suffering, the opportunity is to relate to Jesus, who was relating to us by taking on all of that suffering. And I think the fact that God gave us God's self in a human form to relate to the human experience of suffering and taking it all on and transforming it, making suffering and self-sacrificial love meaningful and powerful through the resurrection is a mystery. And it gives us a chance to sit in that mystery with God in a way that God will keep showing up and meeting us and relating to us. It's a chance to remember that God is with us in our suffering. And if God just took it all away, we never had that struggle, I'm not sure how love for God would develop. I'm not sure how faith and trust would deepen. This kind of gets back to what Rachel was saying about growing up. We have the choice to relate to God and to work out a love that is real. And suffering is often, I think, a crucial point in that development.
So I've learned from some of the suffering that I've endured as an individual, so I can see some of what you're saying. I have a slightly different perspective because, I have a problem personally with making my circumstance better now because it is what it is, or finding utility in my suffering because there is so much in the world, senseless, pointless suffering. So much preventable suffering, And as a Christian, I'm seeking to alleviate as much of that as I can actively. I want people to suffer less. I wake up in the morning and I want you to suffer less because suffering hurts. And I'm going to do my part in making that happen. And so that's how I live my life. And I live my life that way because God will eventually deliver me from my suffering, never mind my present confusion about the suffering that I invariably experience in the world. So to the questioner, I don't know why it's better. but I know that it is where we are. And so what I can offer you is I can walk with you in the suffering. And that's what I can do. That's why I think it's better, because that's what I have. That's what I'm able to do. You know, we're gonna try to make it better for everybody and partner with God in that work. But the mystery of suffering, it still baffles me every day. I don't have an answer to this. You know, the Bible writers don't either. They're in dialogue about it. Ben was talking about how the psalmists have different approaches and how they talk about things. And even the same writer can have a different thought at a different time. And so I'm joining with you in that question. Why is this better? Why is this? And I'm okay with that mystery because of what I'm promised, but I still don't have a great answer.
Well said, Jonny. I think there are no great answers. It's really hard any way we look at it. But I do think that we become closer to God in our suffering because of the particular journey that Jesus went through, and we develop the capacity to be closer with each other, the capacity to love each other more deeply and sometimes even more practically. And I just can't stop thinking about how our Holy Week story today, Wednesday of Holy Week, is the anointing at Bethany scene where Mary pours out this really expensive jar of perfume on Jesus to anoint him for burial, because she kind of sees what's coming in some way. The other disciples are saying what a waste it is, because that money could have been given to the poor to relieve suffering. And Jesus knows that, that's objectively true, but he defends her and says, but what she has done is a beautiful thing. And to me, what he was saying there is nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted that we can offer to God and even to each other. And so that comforts me in my suffering, that even though it sucks and I don't want myself or anyone else to suffer, that this could somehow be used for good. I think that's just a great mystery, how Paul says everything works together for good for those that love God. It's like, how could that be true? But I think that's the question that we're trying to live into every day.
The breath prayer in today's daily prayer entry is cause me to see beyond the cross. And I was going through our time of prayer this morning with my kids, and they were like, what does that mean anyway? And so we were talking about how, like, what it even looks like to die little deaths that we need to die to in order to get to a new life with Jesus, and what it looks like and what it feels like practically when you can die a little death to yourself and put someone before you, someone else before you, how that opens up a whole new way of life. That is what resurrection life looks like, I think. And so I love that prayer goes along with the story at Bethany. And I think it gets back to this question, that being able to die the little deaths that we need to die so that we can identify with Jesus, to be raised up to something else. That's the mystery that God is doing in suffering.
That's a good breath prayer. We should put that in the link here. Cause me to see beyond the cross. We don't know how suffering makes sense, but we are trying to actively trust God to meet us in it and move us through it.
This last section is spiritual show and tell. So share with us something that is nourishing your soul that you want to share with everyone. It's like good news. We need a little good news.
I wanted Settlers of Catan twice this week, and I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm going to tell you why it's also spiritually nourishing, because I've been working from home, and we had to create this whole rhythm for our life together as a family. And I think it's really working. I can't imagine what it would be like if we didn't have some of these regulations set up, or like these rhythms set up. Like when we wake up in the morning, it's not time to watch a show. it's time for family meeting. And after family meeting, we play a game. And then the day begins, and we have school to do, and we have outside time to do, and we go on walks after our meals, and we play games at night. And I win at Settlers of Catan. So the nourishing part isn't necessarily the 10 victory points. The nourishing part is the family time and the kind of the victory of our discipline and how it's helping my family and helping us survive this together.
Do you win by using longest road?
Longest road is a viable strategy, definitely. I think I
just wondering, is that your strategy?
I don't have a strategy. I play the resources that I'm given, and that's how you win at strategy games.
That's how Ben was doing theology earlier in this episode too, in case you're paying attention.
I get all the theology victory points too.
I have two. I'm reading a book. It's a letter read about evangelical purity culture by a woman named Linda K. Klein. And I think it's a nice book. I think she's a good writer. She has a big heart, and I appreciate her humility.
What's it called?
Pure.
Oh, Pure. Okay.
And she has several unique ways of thinking about theology and how theology has been formed largely by men. That's been helpful for me in questioning many of my assumptions. One particular passage that I thought was interesting, which I don't want to overstate, but she said something like, we think of pride as a sin because men are really susceptible to being prideful, whereas women are often told to be submissive and not prideful. And so our theology is sometimes formed around the context of the people writing it. This isn't that profound necessarily, but it was helpful for me in just reframing it. And so what's nourishing me is listening to people that are different than I am. That really helps me a lot. I subscribe to a cooking magazine, and they just came out with a feature this month celebrating the virtues of using a wok. Now, in the past, this magazine has said using a wok on a Western stove doesn't make sense because the flame isn't big enough to kind of engulf the vessel. But now they changed their mind. And the reason I like it is because someone changed their mind. In 2020, people changing their mind nourishes my soul. That really does help me. That it's possible to change. That you can think one thing for 20 years, as this publication did, and then change your mind. I like that flexibility. That's really helpful for me.
So I don't have this all worked out yet, but God has been really speaking some comfort to me this week personally, that I am not a means to an end. I think that in a way I've always kind of looked at myself that way and, felt that need to produce things. Everything is like for a purpose, and that's not entirely a bad thing. But I think here in Holy Week, God's been trying to show me this kind of deeper truth about myself and the resurrection, and that is that I'm not just a means to an end. I am part of the end.
Yes.
With God. That is really the beginning. And so my whole self being eternal right now, I think puts a value on myself that God wants me to see. And for all of us, it's for all of us, of course. But I'm trying to lean more into my resurrection life here, even in the midst of this pandemic.
So good.
I spent some time in my garden this past week weeding and cutting out the dead stuff. And there's this place on the fence row where a weed vine has been growing up for quite a few years now. And I just hack it off down near the ground. And I decided I was going to try to dig it out because I'm tired of this temporary workaround to just cut it off. So I started digging, and as I dug, I discovered that there is literally a whole wooded root ball at the bottom that has grown through the fence and into the fence. Because for years I have just been lopping it off at the soil, and it was so satisfying to dig deeper and to get like this kind of hatchet tool and to work at it. I actually had to get Steve to come help me too. The kids were working at it. It was like a whole project to get beneath the surface and to dig this thing out. So it was nourishing my soul because, as is often the case, God meets me in this physical work in the garden, and it felt satisfying to get to the root of the problem problem.
Literally.
And somehow, yeah, literally the root of the problem. And I just was reflecting at how that's what Jesus is doing in this Holy Week. And it was comforting to me to participate in that in this very tangible way.
Well, thank you, folks, for listening to this podcast. It's good to be with you on this Holy Week. If you want to talk back to us, just send us an email at resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net, and we'll see you on the other side of resurrection.